Gabriella and I discussed that we would prefer to have each speaker essentially introduce themselves because we were concerned about mispronouncing some people's names and not giving proper introductions. So perhaps better that folks introduce themselves. So if you wouldn't mind, perhaps quickly introduce yourself. And then, as you may recall, a 20-minute presentation and 10 minutes of question and answer, roughly, of course. If it's 18 or 22, not a problem.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to participate in this conference on sport, animals, and ethics, and to speak on this panel right after our wonderful keynote speaker, John Oberg. This was very inspiring, and many, many thanks to Sam and Gabriella for organizing this important conference. So my name is Lercier. I am a PhD student in animal law at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And I feel very lucky to be supervised in my thesis by the excellent and kind-hearted Dr. Kendra Coulter from Brock University in Canada. I will be presenting today on ethics and welfare in the French horse racing industry, focusing on the legal status and protection of the health and welfare of racehorses. This is to a large extent the subject of my master's thesis when I studied a master's in animal law, also in Barcelona. And I am following up on this issue in my doctoral thesis by focusing on the post-career of racehorses from the perspective of animal labor.
If I could just interrupt for a sec, your slides are still in, are not in presenter mode yet, if you would just like to switch them.
How do I do that? Like that?
Somewhere it should say, right, presenter mode, mode présentateur.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, and it appears like that. Is it strange?
Yeah. You have advanced to the second slide,
like
which I think is...
No, still doesn't work.
If you go to the very bottom of your screen and there is a small icon next to the volume bar, would that help?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm trying.
Can you see at the bottom of your screen?
Yes.
There's the volume bar, and immediately to the left of the volume bar, there's a small icon. Try clicking on that.
That's what I have.
All right. Well, in that case, I would just suggest you proceed.
So, was it looking weird? Like, could you see the?
It's just you see all of the the slides list on the left and your options on the top.
Strange. I'm really sorry for that.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
We can see most of the slide. I think you're okay to proceed as is.
Okay, well, let's continue, and I hope you can read as much as you can. I'm sorry. So many of us here, I believe, are aware of the special place that horses hold in Western societies where horse racing takes place. And many of you may also be aware that horse racing has come under public scrutiny over abuse, over medication, injuries, and death toll, and might even support a ban for these reasons. Calls to put an end to this sport are common, especially when accidents on tracks lead to the euthanasia of racehorses. I believe that an in-depth reform, at the very least, is necessary to protect the health, welfare, and safety of racehorses in this sport. In doing so, racing societies, professionals from the sector, and veterinarians must play a greater role to protect the welfare of racehorses in France and around the globe if they want to ensure the continued acceptance of this sport. To ensure the sustainability of this sector, practices that are dangerous or detrimental to the horse welfare should be eliminated, while efforts should be made concerning transparency and accountability of the stakeholders towards responsible breeding and ownership of racehorses. Beyond self-regulation and animal protection standards that some states and institutions may set at national or even regional and international level, animal ethics, looking at our moral responsibility towards other animals as individuals, raises the question of what rights animals have and what duties humans have towards them in the context of their use, such as sports. While many sports are structured primarily as non-profit associations for recreational purposes, the main concern of the horse racing industry is to generate revenue and maximize profit. As concern about the welfare of animals used for profit and in sports increases, better guarantees concerning their treatment are expected. Ethics and the law have a role to play to bring about positive changes for horses in the racing industry, and the decisions that are made on their behalf that must be informed by scientific research in horse welfare too. There is a need for reflection on how to better protect horses in the racing industry from their birth, during their career and after their career, and until the end of their lives, and about how to ensure responsible breeding and ownership in a profit-oriented sector for more accountability. As citizens demand better protection for animals and oppose animal abuse, the racing industry will face significant public and economic pressures if it does not seriously commit to the protection of the welfare of racehorses and uphold a higher ethical standard to survive the accusations of cruelty as it is concerned about its future and its economy. Yet, such reflection and solutions for the long-term welfare of racehorses is sorely lacking in France. The racing industry needs to elevate its welfare commitments in order to maintain its social license to operate, understood as the social acceptance of a sport by the public. According to Fielder, it can mean the life or death of the sport. This is directly related to the sustainability of horse racing, examined by authors such as Bergman, who consider ethical and welfare issues in the racing industry. Welfare also plays a key role in athletic performance to such an extent that beyond ethical and legal aspects, sports companies have a financial interest in optimizing it. Welfare comes as a prerequisite for the development of the athlete's full potential and a guarantee of profitability. These two ambitions, welfare and profit, are not irreconcilable. On the contrary, they are interdependent in the sports business, for which investing in animal welfare provides a competitive advantage. Although it is difficult to quantify the benefits of racehorse welfare on the sports company financial results, the costs of malaise are very clear. Accidents, injuries, disease, veterinary expenses, breaks, underperformance, or even the end of a promising career. All of this has a negative price for the sports company. On another hand, beyond enhancing the horse's performance by improving their welfare, the use of animals for sports will be accepted as long as the welfare of these animals is deemed acceptable. In the case of the French horse racing industry, due to the provenance of the revenues, the horse racing bets, the endorsement of the spectators who finance the industry is inescapable. As the racing companies are dependent on this supply to the economic circuit through betting, it is up to the mother societies to carry out a comprehensive strategy to level up its standards. Moving to the legal status and protection of horses in France, this is anecdotal, but the first laws for the protection of animals and against animal cruelty appeared in relation to the work of horses, and more particularly that of horses driving carriages, when the Grammont law was passed in 1850 in France. This law intended to regulate and limit what was considered as an excessive and disrespectful use of horses for work, as society denounced the lack of care and the cruel fate reserved to those who could no longer work. Three main rules common to all domestic animals are worth emphasizing in French animal law. Animals are recognized as living beings endowed with sentience, according to Article 515-14 of the French Civil Code. Serious abuse and acts of cruelty are sanctioned by 2 years imprisonment and a fine of 30,000 euros. And domestic animals must be kept in conditions that are consistent with the biological requirements of their species because of their sentient nature since 1976. In addition, the French Sports Code pays particular attention to the rules on the use of equids, while codes have been issued to regulate horse racing in all European Union countries where these events are taking place. At the regional level, since the creation of the European Union, the plight of horses sent to slaughter has been an issue of concern, especially as regards their transport conditions and heavy veterinary medication. Yet, horses as a species lack specific legislation at the European Union level that would regulate their welfare at the various stages of their lives and according to their use by various sectors. At both the European and international level, there are no binding standards governing the use of animals in sports, which remains a national competence, although animal health regulations governing the movement of equids in the European Union, their identification and registration are of general application. Some including me, argue that horses should be granted legal protections, in particular by changing their legal status to be classified as companion animals for many reasons, including because of their role in most societies. The moral and legal status of animals is the subject of considerable scholarship. Traditionally, in our legal systems, a distinction is made between persons, often erroneously understood as human beings, and things, including domestic animals, who are considered as useful goods. Article 13 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union has granted the status of sentient beings to animals within the sphere of competence of the EU, while the French Civil Code has consecrated animals as living beings endowed with sentience. However, this recognition of animal sentience has produced no clear consequences as far as the person-thing dichotomy is concerned, since although animals are no longer considered as things, they are still treated as such unless protected by special laws, as animals remain subject to the property regime. We have witnessed a transition from the protection of the utility of the domestic animals in the interest of their owners to the limitation of property rights towards the satisfaction of the needs of the individual animal, recognized 2 centuries later as a sentient being and progressively as conscious after the Cambridge Declaration, whose fundamental interests are worthy of legal protection by extension of scientific knowledge into the legal sphere by the Toulon Declaration. I think I'm gonna hurry up to have time to cover other aspects, but if you have time, I suggest you read the Lunus ruling. It's a founding decision of animal law of particular importance in this context, which dealt with the award of damages following the death of a racehorse. The French Court of Cassation qualified the relationship between the racehorse and her owner as one of affection, considering that the death of the horse had caused him a moral prejudice, in addition to the material damage resulting from ownership. The decision is groundbreaking because it did not deal with the loss of a companion animal, but with the death of a racehorse, still considered as a livestock animal, for which we would have expected the characterization of a material damage and the award of damages up to the pure market value of the racehorse. Yet, the categorization of the animal did not exclude the existence of a link of affection. At this time, moral prejudice was conceived exclusively in the context of the loss of a human person, moreover, in the unique circumstance of the existence of a family relationship, excluding the award of damages to compensate for the moral prejudice of the loss of a concubine. In other words, this kind of damage was first recognized in the case of the loss of a racehorse before being extended to the loss of a concubine in French law. Racehorse welfare is widely considered by researchers and practitioners. Veterinary research on their performance and behavior abounds. However, most research is focused on optimizing their use rather than prohibiting their abuse. During the career of racehorses, urgent welfare issues include doping, over-medication, the use of the whip and of painful devices, racing immature horses, track safety and lethal injuries, and their living and working conditions. I am concerned eventually with the possibility for reconversion and retirement at the end of their career. In France, despite the adoption of a charter for equine welfare in 2016, applicable to all equines regardless of their use and age, and based on 8 fundamental and very basic principles, the living conditions of racehorses are all too often still characterized by retrograde habits and lack of ethological knowledge that hinder their welfare and performance, such as inadequate nutrition, lack of space, social isolation, and confinement in the box. There is no definition of what constitutes acceptable use or abusive use, and of the difference between the two to be found. And I feel that using broad and imprecise standards seems counterproductive, as it leaves it to the individual to decide what is acceptable or abusive without taking the horse herself as a starting point. On the contrary, establishing binding standards such as legal work duration, prohibition of overloading, mandatory rest, compulsory health monitoring, or retirement for racehorses seems essential to ensure their welfare. As regards the status of racehorses in sports, despite the fact that we can reasonably argue that the racehorse has a similar career, the privilege of being considered as a sports person, that is to say, an athlete, is reserved for humans. As a consequence, they are denied medical supervision of the kind that is granted to human athletes, and medical checkups that are scheduled on a regular basis for high-level human athletes are denied to the horse athletes too. Hence, no veterinary monitoring or certification for the practice of the sport is mandatory for the admission of horses to participate in competition. Only some exclusions aimed at maintaining a clean sport temporarily exclude certain competitors so as to not give them an unfair advantage in case of doping. On another hand, racehorses never perceive the results of the profit they generate, whether they are tangible, such as their offspring, or less tangible, such as the allocation of earnings in competition. As society tends to rethink its relationship to animals, norms relating to the protection, subsistence, health, working time limitation, compulsory rest, and retirement of racehorses, considered as non-human athletes or workers, have to be adopted. So I won't have time to address that, but many ethical and welfare issues are raised in relation to horse racing. There is extensive research in equine welfare to inform the formulation of guidelines and standards due to the historical prevalence of horse use by humans and equine versatility. I will focus on the racing of immature horses, as horses are usually brought into training very or even too early before they have reached adulthood and are fully grown, in order to select the very best and bring them to the highest level, which can be detrimental to their development and welfare. A minimum age to be trained, consistent with the development of the young, should be informed by scientific knowledge about the growth and welfare of young horses. Ultimately, a common premise is that slaughter will improve horse welfare and is a human way to dispose of racehorses, as opposed to them being unwanted, abandoned, and neglected. However, many, me included, are not convinced. Beyond being unethical, there are sound reasons to oppose slaughter as a human way to end a racehorse's career and life. In particular, animal welfare standards at the time of slaughter are insufficient, in addition to being poorly applied. In this regard, and I will conclude on that probably, Coulter has suggested considering the animal's well-being in work lives, not only before and after work on a daily basis, but also before and after their formal careers, over the course of their lives, arguing that although we have developed pensions, elder care, and retirement in the case of humans, nothing of the sort is yet in place for animals. There is a clear need to reform the standards governing the treatment of racehorses during their careers, but that is not all. The standards must embrace the whole lives of racehorses and protect them against the risk they run of being treated as something that can be disposed of once their usefulness or profitability is extinguished. As a conclusion, more research into ethics of sports using animals for profit and racehorse welfare is crucial. The adoption of standards and their consolidation in the sphere of sports law have certainly improved the conditions under which horses are used by the sports companies, well beyond the minimum standards governing the keeping of domestic animals. Yet they are excluded from the monitoring and protection of the health and welfare of sports persons, reserved for human beings, although this should be a priority and could be implemented by recognizing them as non-human athletes. Racehorses are not yet considered as workers either, I don't know why, but still as assets belonging to their owners, objects of labor to be used by human workers and ideally profitable to their owners. So research on the legal regime governing the welfare of racehorses and their ownership in particular is indispensable. I see value in employing the growing body of scholarship on animals, labor, and the law to understand the horse in a professional setting, seeing racehorses as fellow workers and companions that contribute to society in economic, social, cultural, and emotional ways, among others. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry for having to rush a bit to respect the time. Thank you.
Marlene.
If you have questions, I will be happy to answer, as I believe that many issues I wanted to cover have not been addressed. So hopefully it's the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. You raised a lot of issues, all of which could be individual presentations on their own. So
Yeah.
I look forward to reading your research. We can open the floor to questions now. We don't have much time, but is there anyone who would like to begin with your questions? Well, perhaps I could begin with a question there, Marin. With your, you have raised so many different things, and I'm particularly interested in the social license to operate, and perhaps you could just define that for us. Yeah, I'm sorry if you did it, I missed it in the talk.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I believe there is an article in Australia that is focusing in particular on the social license to operate in the thoroughbred racing industry.
Mhm.
And there is also the work of Julie Filler that I like very much. And she defined the social license to operate as the acceptation of the public for the sport to continue. So it means that if society is shocked at the way we treat, for example, resources, the social license to operate might be removed very simply. And on the economic side, this could happen through a drop in bettings too, because bettings is what finances the horse racing industry.
Mhm.
That's almost all the revenue that they generate and then that they have to redistribute. And that's what finances the allocations when a horse wins a race or is second or is third. You know, you have allocations, and that's what makes the whole activity survive. So if the public does not finance this activity through bets anymore because they are shocked or because they don't want to see, for example, horses falling on the tracks and being euthanized because they have broken a leg, well, maybe either by economic incidents, the sport could disappear. This could disappear if society rejects, for example, cases of mistreatment, of violence. I don't know if tomorrow there is a video showing serious abuse against a racehorse, or again, videos of racehorses ending their lives at the slaughterhouse. Every time it is in the media, it is very seriously called into question if we should continue to accept that. And I think the first thing to do is to ban the slaughter of, well, racehorses, but of all horses, in my opinion, because every time there is a scandal, and if the racing industry is to survive the allegations of cruelty, this is the first thing to do. And second, to ensure that medication is used to cure the horses and to care for their health, and not to mask lameness and to mask this lameness until the horse breaks. There are many cases of horses just breaking on the tracks because instead of being cured, they've been over medicated until this point. And this is also the issue in the case of very young horses that are being trained when they are, like in the case of children, we would say, well, you shouldn't exercise that much because that's not good for your development.
Yes.
Right.
Well, thank you very much. Boy, there are a lot of good points there. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm sorry, Lisa, I didn't see your question until after I had asked mine about
I didn't see it either, sorry.
what you said, the court of public opinion describing social license to operate.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask all of you to join me in thanking Marin for her talk. We are going to now switch over to Jason's talk. So we need to go back to the main page and hit the next link. But Marin, I'm going to be in touch with you because I really want to learn more about your work. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm happy if you enjoyed it, and maybe next time we'll cover another point. And thank you for having me, and best of luck to the next participants.
All right, thank you and good night.
Yeah.